Morning, everybody. Crappy Mondays, and welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's assistant editor, Jason Beattie. Morning, Jason.
Morning, Susie.
Hey, where do you stand on crappy? Do you think it's a swear word? My mother told me it was a swear word yesterday.
I thought you said happy, but I thought she could have said crappy, has she? There you go.
I say it every Monday. Maybe I'm getting away with it as a result. Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so please get into the comments. Ask us your questions. Do you think crappy is a swear or not? Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to pass a new law about it and see if that makes the tiniest bit of difference. Well, so what have we got for you today? Well, speaking of laws that haven't made much difference, the Mirror has splashed on the death this weekend of 68-year-old Esther Martin, apparently after she was attacked by two XL bully dogs while looking after her grandson. And more on that in a bit. But first, I want to talk about the Mirror's page 2 story, which carries the headline, "Betrayal of Our Children." Now, Jason, this seems a bit dramatic for a Monday morning. Can you take us through it? Is that headline justified?
Oh, absolutely. The problem is none of this is a surprise, Susie. Where do you begin in terms of what this government has done to take away support for families across the board, which has resulted in, as these figures show, a rise in child poverty, a large rise in extreme child poverty, a increase in malnutrition, a return of this isn't featured here, but a return of what they call Victorian diseases such as rickets and scurvy, a major problem with childhood obesity, and rising infant mortality. None of this is an accident. It's all a result of deliberate policies. Let's go through some of them if you want to, or you can. Yeah.
Well, I'd rather none of it was happening, but yeah, I think we're going to have to need to know about it.
Let's start with the two major changes to benefits introduced by the Tories. One was a cap on overall benefits, and the other was what we call the two-child benefit cap, which is when after you've had more than two children, they take away the support you get for those children. Now, if you removed either of those measures, this was a report by the Resolution Foundation last week, you would support 500,000 families overnight, i.e. you would lift hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. So that's the starting point of one of the main reasons why we've got such ingrained child poverty. And this is a really important point, Susie, and I can't stress this enough, because a lot of people are going to look at me saying, oh, they deserve it. This, they're just feckless. They shouldn't have so many children. They can't afford it. 65% of children in poverty, living in poverty, are in working households. This is not people, just relying on the state. They are trying to work. They are working, but the money they are earning doesn't cover the overheads.
Yeah. And I think we need to bear in mind as well that obviously people can have children in good times, buy their home and all the rest of it. And then they can have a car accident. They can develop a disability. They can get long COVID. They can, just hit rough times and suddenly find themselves unable to afford what they previously could. And that can happen to all of us. How far are any of us away from not being able to put food on the table?
Yeah.
If you think about it, how long could you survive with no cash?
Yeah. So then chuck in issues like rising energy bills, which really hurt those on lower incomes more than those on richer incomes. Chuck in inflation, which I know is coming down, but it was incredibly high. That again hurts those on lower incomes rather than those on higher incomes. Chuck in rising food and fuel prices, and then you've got this horrific combination of measures which impact badly on the poorest families, and rising housing costs. Rent has gone up at twice the level of earnings in the last decade. So you've got this kind of conflagration of issues. And then you've got more government interventions which are making things worse. So like one of the problems they cite in this report is problems with tooth decay. Now, you can't get an NHS dentist. 9 out of 10 NHS dentists are not taking on new patients. Tooth decay is now the single biggest cause of admissions for children to hospital. More than anything else. Now, the consultation dentist, this is one of the problems. Let me go on, because this is so important. Childhood obesity. Why have we got childhood obesity? Now, this is because people on low incomes can only afford junk food, and healthy food is extremely expensive. And there's whole areas of this country where they have actually what they call food deserts, where it's impossible to buy healthy food. We actually, the Mirror visited last year, but Natasha, the consumer editor, went to this place in Knowlesy we went to Knowlesy in Liverpool, and the nearest place you could buy fresh food was over 5 miles away.
How do you get there if you don't have a car, if the bus isn't going that way?
That's not unique. That's just an issue. And then you've got the problem, you could solve this by quite easily. Well, not solve it. You could help mitigate it by things like free school meals. That would give children a healthy diet. It's one of the reasons it's backed by people like the British Dental Association, because they see the consequences of actually, you give children nutritious meals a day. It helps their learning, it helps their concentration, and it helps fight childhood obesity. Yeah. So that's another issue. So as I say, it's across the board. You've got all these problems which have got worse since 2010, and that's the key thing. So child poverty. I know there's various measures of child poverty, and the Tories will cite one figure, and other people will cite others. But the key fact is that child poverty has risen to 4.2 million since 2010, and that should shame the nation.
And what do you think, everybody? Have you noticed problems along these lines? Do you feel that your children are getting the health and the start that they should do? Let us know. Elsewhere in the paper today, there is a piece, I think it's by a dentist, who's saying that, the number of things they're seeing now, people who are having to treat themselves at home and so on. This isn't really related to children, but having to treat themselves at home, they're coming to the dentist by the time they do get there with pus in their gums, shards of teeth still in their gums that need removing. And it's very traumatic for the dentist. But they're saying these are Victorian levels of tooth problems. And obviously it's affecting our children. Now, the Tories may well sort of quibble over issues of child poverty and what one you should count and what one's useful and all the rest of it. But I think one of the most shocking stats in here, Jason, that I was seeing is that it's perinatal mortality. So this is death as a result of childbirth, basically. Brian says, what country is this? Well, unfortunately, it's ours, Brian. So the number of deaths, the period that you go from when you become pregnant to 1 year old. Okay, so childbirth, pregnancy, childbirth in the first year of life. And in the UK, there are 4 deaths for every 1,000 children from the time that they become pregnant until right up until 1 year. This is double what it is in Japan, Sweden, Finland, Slovenia. There's only 1.7, 1.8. And we've got 4. And we are a wealthy nation, easily as developed as those places, who should be having the same death rates of children. And children are dying and at birth and in the first year of their life at a faster rate here than in other developed nations. And that's not an issue of how the Tories might want to talk about how you measure it or child poverty or go into the detail of it. That's just you're born, you die, because we're not looking after you properly at that point in life. So the stats are showing in the story, they're dying at higher rates at birth. 20% of children are overweight, aged just 5 by the time they get to school. There's virtually no mental health services for them, although there's more demand. They are unvaccinated in many, many cases, and a quarter, one in 4 have terrible, terrible teeth. So I suppose the question people are going to ask, Jason, is what's responsible for it? Is it just Tories, which seems a very simplistic answer, or is it more than one thing? Because some of it is going to be about dentists, some of it is going to be about midwives, some of it's going to be about nutrition. It's not all just one thing, is it?
Look, the easiest thing to do, Susie, here is blame the parents. But parents can only operate within the society which is established around them. So if you remove the kind of the structure of support around families, they are going to struggle. And this is what's happened. So, as I say, the first thing to look at is the benefit system. Then you look at housing. I visited a primary school last year, Susie, and it was a primary school in Southwark in London. It had 480 pupils. A quarter of those pupils were in what they call temporary accommodation. Now, temporary was a misnomer because some have been in temporary accommodation for 5 or 6 years. But that means they were living in B&Bs or hostels, or in shared housing where they had often had no access to a kitchen. And they definitely, many of them didn't have any access to a fridge, so they couldn't even store fresh food. And then people say, how does that affect a child if you can't cook from healthy meals? No wonder they're going to be obese. No wonder they're going to have, these Victorian diseases. And that's even before you worry about the concern for their education. I'll just go through that again. That's 1 in 4 children in a primary school. So housing's a massive, massive problem. Yeah. Then you go on to the things like Sure Start. So Labour set up these Sure Start centres. There were about 3,000 of them when Labour left office. Now they provided early years support for mothers and parents and children. Yeah. And they were there not just to offer support, but also kind of guidance on how to bring up your child. They provided childcare. The Tories cut them by the thousands. Again, they're now replacing what we call family hubs. They woke up to the issue, but too late. So you take away these little bits of support, or one issue won't matter, but put together they can really make a difference. So they take away the money for the benefits. They take away the Sure Start scheme, which provides the support and help you need for families. Yeah, they fail to build enough housing so people are living in temporary accommodation. Yeah, and work doesn't pay, and you end up with this problem.
And one of the things I think as well that's changed, and this is maybe a social thing, is that if you are fairly well off, the chances are when you have your own family, someone's mum or dad is going to come in and live with you for a week or two and get you started. Right. And they're going to be on call over the years when you have a particular issue. But there are many, many people, especially those who have less money, who have to live somewhere a long way away from their mums and dads. And they don't have the family support that traditionally lots of us might have had. And that I think some of the wealthier people kind of still expect to have and do have. So that's change. And if you don't have that sort of social structure around you, then you're relying on what the government provides. And if the government doesn't provide it, then you've got nothing to rely on. And one other thing Jason and I just mentioned is that a little while ago, I had to do my bit as a parent and go on a school trip with my daughter's class. And we all had packed lunches, of course. And I noticed that when we all sat down for lunch, every single child had something in their lunchbox that was individually wrapped in plastic. Right, so a pack of something that your mum gets at the supermarket. There's 6 in there. You can have one every day in your lunch, kind of thing, whatever it might be. Now, that's the best way of buying it. They're marketed for children. A lot of them seem healthy. And if you look at the back and you're trying to pick out how much sugar's in one or the other, you just get a load of figures. You don't really get told what's a safe amount, what's not a safe amount, which is red, green, or amber kind of thing. And some are just, and also a lot of this is like ultra processed, and we all do it. I do it too. But actually being able, the stuff that is marketed to give your children as food is often can't there be some rules about the fact that if it's marketed for children, that therefore it's got to hit certain standards, not just about sugar, but just about everything, general nutrition. It just seems to me that there's some horrible stuff going on here, really. I mean, what do you think, everybody? When you buy your children's food, do you sit there and go through the back, or do you just assume that if it's being sold, therefore it must be okay? It's in the shops. It's got to be. It's got to pass the government's test in some way. And is the government testing it? That's what we don't know.
Yeah, one of the frustrations I had with Sunak's determination pledge to try and make Britain a smoke-free nation was, I mean, nobody's kind of, against measures to kind of encourage people to stop smoking, but it's missing the target. Smoking's falling anyway. The real issue facing children at the moment is obesity and junk food and their diet. It's by far the biggest crisis we are facing as a nation. When you've got such a large number of overweight children, you're storing up huge problems for the future. Within the next decade, the NHS will be spending more money on obesity-related diseases than it will on any other issue. So we'll be spending more than on cancer because it's such a big problem. So we're going to be spending billions and billions of pounds a year on tackling conditions such as diabetes.
Yeah.
And we really shouldn't be looking at smoking because that's kind of, I'm not downplaying smoking, but I'm just saying from the numbers of people smoking are falling. We should be looking at this issue.
Yeah. Right, we're going to move on a little bit, but first I just want to read quickly the Department of Health's comment on this particular story. Now, bear in mind, okay, the story, 1 in 4 children have rotten teeth, 1 in 5 are obese when they start primary school. They're dying at double the rate in childbirth, and this is the government response, okay? We have taken significant action to improve children's health, both now and in the long term. This includes dramatically reducing sugar in children's foods, investing 600 million to improve children's sport, and encouraging healthier diets for lower income households through schemes like Healthy Start. Now, the trouble is, as Jason was just pointing out, really, sugar was cut under Boris Johnson, but he came to power after a decade of Tory governments that haven't done it and argued about it. Children's sport needs more than 600 million to make up for the swimming pools they can't afford to run and the school pitches that have been sold off. And Tories won't just, the whole about the encouraging healthier diets through schemes and stuff like that. They will just refuse to provide free school meals, which, as Jason has said, would do more to improve the healthy diets of children than anything else. But government spin doctors, there we go. Now, we need to move on to the main story of the day. And a man has been arrested in connection with the death on Saturday afternoon of Esther Martin, who had popped round to her daughter and son-in-law's house in Jaywick in Essex to look after her 11-year-old grandson. Now, the house, one of her daughters claims, contained 8 XL bully dogs or XL bully types. There are 2 adults and 6 puppies. Now, Esther's daughter, Kelly, said the puppies had started fighting and that Esther had been told if this happened, and I quote, to put a broom in among them to distract them. And it was apparently this which may have caused the 2 adult dogs to then turn on Esther. Now, her grandson ran screaming from the house for help, luckily was saved from the attack as a result. But when police arrived, Esther was pronounced dead at the scene. Now, Jason, this is a fairly horrific story. A man's under arrest, so we can't comment much about some of the detail for contempt of court reasons. And we have to be careful what we say. And I would ask those in the comments to be a bit careful and thoughtful about the fact we don't know quite what happened and nothing's been proven yet either. But I thought that Rishi had banned XL bully dogs. We've been talking about it for a long time. The Mirror's campaigned for it. The ban was agreed and it finally came into force 4 days ago. So how come the attacks are still happening? Well,
the problem is that there are loopholes in here. So under the new laws, you have to have the dog on a muzzle outside the home. The dog should be registered and it should also be neutered. But that doesn't apply to within the home. So that's the first issue. The second issue, and I'm talking very broadly here because we don't know the incidents of this case. Yeah, this was a first step, but the problem with the Dangerous Dogs Act is it prescribes certain dogs, and in this case, this is not the same problem as emerged with the XL bullies. That you can also have crossbreeds, and legislating for crossbreeds is incredibly difficult because how do you exactly define a dog which could have kind of come from 2 or 3 different kind of breeds? So that's another issue.
Around the legislation, they can't they, by a bit of interbreeding, and it does sort of seem that if it's about neutering and registering and getting the license and so on, if you don't take them out of the home, as you said, you don't have to muzzle them and you don't really have to necessarily do anything much to register them. You won't be under much pressure to do it. And of course, if you leave them in the house, they're going to go slightly stir crazy anyway and have behavioural problems. June says they won't be able to do a total ban on these animals because there will be people who will breed them. The certification is just not enough. The man who owned these dogs, well, we can't talk about that. They were his dogs, and therefore it was his crime. And dogs like this are dangerous. I just remind people to be a bit careful about the person who is under arrest. He is entitled to a fair trial, and we can't prejudge any of it. But the ban came in after a mirror campaign. Okay, it was pretty simple, really. It was just a case of adding XLs to the list of breeds that are already banned under the Dangerous Dogs Act, I think, if I'm right. Which means, as Jason said, if you want to keep one, you have to meet certain requirements. Now, at this stage, we don't know if the dogs in question had been registered or not, but it's got to be said, it's thought there are tens of thousands of XL bullies who have been registered. Some of them, as we've just seen in that footage, waggy, happy, well-behaved creatures. And I suppose if they've got good and caring owners, well, that's just they're going to go and get them registered, and that's just dandy. But if you're not a good and caring owner, inclined perhaps, as June said, to breed them at home for cash, you won't have any reason to sign up to that particular law, perhaps, and you would in fact try to avoid signing up to that registration. How do we get to the irresponsible dog owners, Jason? Because it's those people and those dogs where these attacks are going to keep happening, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think Andy in the comments here has just pointed out more or less what we were saying, but the biggest loophole is it's very difficult to identify what is or isn't an XL bully, and I think that's a very fair point. So the one of the things we've been calling for in the mirror campaign is much tougher regulation of the breeding of dogs, and also the sale of dogs. I mean, at the moment, it's the laws are very weak, even not non-existent in some cases. Anybody can just breed dogs without a license and then sell them. And I think that would make a significant difference if you properly license this trade. There's all sorts of evidence that the breeding of vicious and dangerous dogs is linked to criminal gangs. It's linked to dog fighting, and it makes perfect sense to me to tighten the legislation on this. And
that's the second demand in the Mirror's demands about the campaigns. The first was an overhaul of the Dangerous Dogs Act, which hasn't happened. The second is to enforce the rules that already exist to stop illegal and irresponsible breeding, which hasn't happened. And a public information campaign about responsible dog ownership, which also hasn't happened.
Yeah.
So
the public information campaign is going to, that's actually what we've done in other countries. They've done that in places like Austria and France. And it's not just public information. They actually make people who want to own certain breeds attend courses to actually kind of.
Well, again, this is one of the things. It's about if you're responsible, you're going to go on the course, aren't you? JC says it's more problem owner than problem dog. If you're the kind of person who doesn't really give a damn or is going to create those kind of dogs, then you're not going to go on the course. You're not going to do the thing. Now, firstly, perhaps this is kind of still happening because it's all a bit too soon. The ban's only just come in. Whether you're registered or not, it's going to take a while, perhaps, for everyone to sort of understand the new rules and sign up to things, get their dogs signed up, get them down the vet, all the rest of it. It was only in on sort of February the 1st, and it's February the 5th now. But, if someone wants... For example, I'll just read Lisa's comment. Lisa says the single biggest issue with the Dangerous Dogs Act is it's based solely on the appearance and measurements of the dog in question. There is no actual use of DNA to prove heritage or breed of that dog. It's ludicrous. And this is true. I've been down Battersea Dogs Home and seen perfectly well-behaved dogs in their sort of Dangerous Dogs Act pound that have been put there by the police and are under sort of sentence of death because the police have decided they look like they might be one of the banned breeds. Now, the police officer in question may not be a dog expert, don't know anything about it, but they're not analysing the dog to see if it is one of the banned breeds. They've just decided, and this is just someone that the police has come across, perhaps because the owner's died in their house or they've gone into a care home and the dog's been barking or something like that. And they've just gone and found this dog and decided that it's dangerous and therefore it gets killed. It's a bit bizarre. But, if someone wants an unneutered dog, if you're going to do this irresponsible breeding, and we know there was 8 puppies in this house, we don't know if it was responsible or irresponsible breeding. There are 8 puppies involved in this attack. it means it's in their financial interests not to neuter that dog, therefore not to register and not to sign up to the rules and to evade the authorities. And the rarer these bullies get, or these type of dogs get, because of the ban, the more likely it is that the price of those puppies is going to rise, and that financial incentive to avoid any kind of detection and to criminalize it is only going to increase, isn't it, Jason? I mean, in a way, if you want people to license for breeders and things like that, it's only going to, if you just have the Dangerous Dogs Act without that license for breeding, it's going to get worse and it's going to go underground, become part of the underworld.
I mean, there's always a danger of any new law you bring in, but it's going to drive people underground. I mean, I get that, but it's better than having no laws at all. I do think licensing and breeding is a first step. I would go further personally. I would make sure that all dogs have to be microchipped, and I would look seriously at bringing back some form of dog licensing.
And again, people say that's the kind of thing that only responsible or wealthier people tend to do, but it could help. I do generally think that there should be a license to breed. I think like chipping and neutering should be automatic, pretty much. I do think that should be something that every owner is under some kind of compunction or pressure, social or otherwise, to actually have their dog neutered, because lots of people do not do that. I think if you don't want, and you would want to keep your animal unneutered because you're going to breed them, then that should get a license. I don't think you can license every dog. You can definitely license breeders, which would give powers to police and trading standards and people like that to go in when they see puppies advertised, whether it's on the dark web or anything else, and go in and have some arrests and capture people who are doing it irresponsibly. Dave says Staffy, the nanny dog, just because it's 21 inches tall, could be classed as an XL bully. It's known as a nanny dog because it's very good with children. And yes, some Staffies, I can remember about 10, 20 years ago, lots of outrage about staff. I think there were a couple of Staffy attacks, and people decided that Staffies were dangerous dogs. And it is generally, as everyone says, it's the owners that are the problem, and it's the owners we have to legislate for, isn't it? Now, but there's more to come out about this. First and foremost, the lady's lost her life. A grandson's lost his gran, and probably saw some of that happen. Esther's two daughters have spoken very movingly about the loss of their mum, who looks like a lovely lady from the photographs. Would this be resolved and just brought to a head, and perhaps, the obvious and sensible things that we've been talking about here, Jason, would they actually be enacted if the people who were in charge of enacting things understood a bit more about, Esther and her family and the lives that get affected by this sort of thing?
This was the frustration we faced, Susie, when we launched the campaign on dangerous dogs, is that we kept on saying, if the victims of the dog attacks were often, not exclusively, but often from the poorer parts of the country, they were on estates outside of London. And we kept on going, if this had happened in leafy Surrey and the victim was a kind of, photogenic, kind of white, blonde-haired girl who went to a private school, the government would have acted years ago. And kind of, maybe that's unduly cynical, I don't know, but I always got that sense they just kind of didn't care because they didn't understand these people and they didn't know anything about them, and they could just kind of, and that's made us so angry, because we're just going, look, this is happening far too often, and it's just taken so long. I mean, I'm glad they've taken action on this finally, but it's not nearly enough. And it almost seemed like it was only because it kind of started to build a bit of a head of steam in the right-wing papers after we've been doing this for like 5 years. But you suddenly thought, we're listening. But there's so much more which can be done.
Yeah, it's a bit like the sugar tax, I suppose, in a way. It just took them a long time to get round to it because it became an issue of, libertarianism. And it was the people who were passing the laws for a decade were like, well, sugar's not our problem, we're fine having as much sugar as possible. We're not fat, kind of thing. And they didn't the fact that it was helping the nation as a whole, as a group of people, didn't really occur quite so much. Going back to the stuff we first talked about and children mortality and so on Twitter, Jill says, you're right about the solution, which Jason was talking about, was more care workers and so on. I fear the cost of catch up and the money to build accommodation for people just isn't there. Money management isn't a strong point with our government unless it's for themselves and their hangers on. Lovely cynical thought to end on, Jill. Thank you very much. We have managed to find some good news in the world, though. There is some. Hooray! On a Monday morning as well. Here it is. Now, I left school at 18 in something of a hurry. I couldn't wait to get out. And the idea of going to university for another 3 years of being told what to think was anathema to me, filled me with dread. I went straight to work on the local paper instead. Yet more school, no thanks. Not so for Dr. David Marjo, who not only qualified as a doctor back in 1952, but has just graduated again, age 95, with a degree in European philosophy that he signed up to after he lost his wife of 60 odd years. So he has something to do. There's a picture there picking up his degree in Kingston last week at the weekend. Jason, is this proof that when you get around to start having long naps at lunchtime, the best place for you is with all the other students?
Yeah, I mean, he did European philosophy. I did a module about when I did my degree, and God, it made my brain hurt.
Well, it's a great way, I would imagine, of stimulating the old neurons and keeping things.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think I am still alive at his age, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of like it's quite impressive.
If you went back to university now, what would you study? Something completely different? What would you do?
I wouldn't want to go back to. What I'd like to do is something which I never was able to do when I was younger, which I still can't do now. I'd like to go learn something practical, like carpentry. I'd like a skill.
You're the soft-handed journalist wants to go and get some calluses.
Yeah, I want to do something.
It's a bit late now, though, isn't it?
No, he's at 95. I've got plenty of time in my life to get.
Well, luckily he doesn't have to try and make a living out of European philosophy.
I'd like to do something different. Just wouldn't you, Susie? What would you do?
Something entirely different, yeah. I never went to university, so I missed out on all that, although I teach at uni now. But I think one of the things that I would like to do would be to go and live in a foreign city, properly for several years and just be there and just start speaking Italian by the end of it or something. To have that big experience to go somewhere else. That's what I would quite like, and do something that I don't get to do now, like sit down and read books.
I've done
do
that.
A lecture degree, but somewhere totally foreign, and learn a language while I'm doing it, and just be a long way away from the Daily Mirror and all the newspapers and all the news and all the government and the Tories. I'm just going to be a different country. Of course, after Brexit, it's a bit more difficult, isn't it? Thank you, Tories. You're stuck with me, and I'm stuck with you.
I've done that. To learn a new language is to learn a new soul, they say.
Oh, what a nice thought. There you go. Grazie mille, Jason. And thank you everyone for taking part, and hopefully we'll get somewhere with dangerous dogs and children health, perhaps with the next government. We'll have to wait and see, won't we? I'm sure we'll still be here moaning about it in a few years' time. Thank you everyone for taking part. Thank you, Jason, for explaining that to us. If you're listening on podcast, please leave us a review so other people can find us. We will see you all again on Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock for another edition of the News Agenda. Till then, everybody, stay safe. Tatty bye.